Hello, I'm Jeremy Lytle. I'm one of the Adult Services Librarians here at the Allegro Rest Books Regional Library on Beatties Ford Road. I'd like to welcome you to Week 3 of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library's Nonprofit Real World Crash Course Series. Today, we'll be talking about fundraising, and I am thrilled to welcome a panel of experts from the Association of Fundraising Professionals Charlotte Chapter. The mission of the Association of Fundraising Professionals Charlotte Chapter is to provide its members with opportunities to advance philanthropy by becoming effective and ethical fundraisers. The Charlotte Chapter of AFP is a proud affiliate of AFP International, which represents more than 30,000 members across 230 chapters throughout the world who work to advance philanthropy through advocacy, research, education, and certification programs. The association fosters development and growth of fundraising professionals and promotes high ethical standards in the fundraising profession. Today, I am honored to welcome Nick Stewart, who is the philanthropy manager at the Relatives, who will demystify fundraising and the development cycle for us, as well as Sarah Lanners Avinger, CFRE, who is the director of philanthropy at YWCA Central Carolinas, and she will talk to us about making your case for support. We also have Erica Ellis, Senior Gift Officer at Individual and Major Giving with Make-A-Wish, Central and Western North Carolina, who will discuss simple ways for small nonprofits to ask for money. And last but certainly not least, we have Brittany Jenkins, who is the Manager of Leadership Gifts with the Charlotte Rescue Mission, who will present the top 10 tips for new fundraisers. So Nick, Sarah, Erica, and Brittany, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nick is going to kick things off for us today. So without further ado, Nick, please take it away.
Right. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and thank you everybody who's with us tonight. My name is Nick Stewart. I'm the philanthropy manager at the Relatives. I'm also a board member of AFP's Charlotte chapter, and I'm going to demystify the fundraising process, talk about the development cycle, and define some words that we're going to be using throughout our presentation. So no doubt you have been in a room with, whoa, oh, there's some thunder, and there goes my dog making an unscheduled cameo. Apologies. No doubt you have been in a room with people who work in an industry that you don't work in. And listening to their conversation is like, well, it's like listening to a dog bark. You know they're talking, but you have no clue what they're talking about. The same thing holds true in fundraising. So I'm going to talk about some terms that we'll be using throughout the presentation. So development, the majority of nonprofits have a development department, and you've probably seen job listings for a development director or development officer. Apologies for my dog. Development is the total process by which an organization increases public understanding of its mission and, most importantly, acquires financial support for its programs. Some organizations refer to their development department as their philanthropy department. So, for example, my title is the philanthropy manager. You've all heard the term philanthropist. Philanthropy is kind of a prettier way of saying development. And by definition, it's the love of humankind, usually expressed by an effort to enhance the well-being of humanity through personal acts of practical kindness, or, here we go again, by financial support. And full confession, when I meet someone for the first time and they ask what I do for a living, I love to say I work in philanthropy. It just sounds very fancy. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry about that. Stop. Sorry. A development plan. So that is your process, your strategy for raising funds. So let's say that your organization needs to raise $10,000 in the next 6 months. Your development plan is your roadmap. How are you going to do that? What are the strategies that you're going to use to raise those necessary funds? Individual, corporate, and foundation. Those are the different types of donors that you are going to be talking to. And my colleagues are going to talk about how you speak to each individual type of donor. So individuals, corporate, and foundation. If you take the AFP Fundraising Dictionary definition of mission, which is like eating a dry piece of white meat chicken, it means a purpose that fulfills a societal need. But basically, your mission is what your organization is set up to do. What's the impact that you want to have in the community? What is the need that you're trying to address? The next 4 words that I'm going to talk about, identify, cultivate, solicit, and stewardship, those are all part of the development cycle, which I'm going to cover in the next slide. So identify is all about figuring out who is your potential donor, who has the interest and who has the capacity to make a gift to support your mission. And you do that through research and through investigation. Cultivating is all about engaging that potential donor. It has nothing to do with asking and everything to do with education, letting them know about the work that you're doing, letting them know about the need in the community that you're addressing. Soliciting is actually asking, is sitting down with that donor and asking them to support your organization financially. And stewardship is the thanking. It's the showing of impact. And my favorite definition of stewardship is proving you're worthy of continued financial support. You've heard me mention the word gift. When a donor gives you money, they are making a gift. They're not receiving anything in return, so it's a gift. A gift acknowledgement is a letter that expresses not only appreciation for the gift or the service, but confirming the use that the donor intended. So let's say that you have a donor, Betty Smith, who has given you $10,000 because your organization, helps out-of-work anteaters. You're going to send a letter to Betty that says, Betty, thank you so much for your generous gift of $10,000. Your gift will be used to support out-of-work anteaters in our community. A gift receipt is different than a gift acknowledgement. A gift receipt is for tax purposes. Now you can send a gift receipt to any donor that makes a gift. If they make a gift of $5 or they make a gift of $5 million, you can send them a gift receipt. However, if a donor wants to make a charitable deduction, when they're doing their taxes and the gift is over $250 or more, the IRS requires a gift receipt. So it's a really good idea to look at everyone that is given to your organization in a calendar year, pull that report and send them a gift receipt early January. The key is to get it to them before they call you and ask for it, because they will call you and they will ask for it. A pledge is a financial commitment that will be paid over time. So for example, your donor, Betty Smith, who really believes in your mission of supporting out-of-work anteaters, let's say she's going to give you that $10,000, but she's going to pay it over the next 5 years. So she's going to fulfill that pledge over 5 years' time at $2,000 a year. So you want that in writing, and you want confirmation of conversation so that there's an agreement between you and the donor that she is going to do what she said she is going to do. And finally, restricted and unrestricted gifts. So if a donor makes a gift to support your organization, that's generally going to be an unrestricted gift. That means that you can use those funds as you see fit to advance your mission. So that can be paying the rent on your office, that can be paying the light bill, paying staff, buying supplies. If it's a restricted gift, that means that it's restricted to a certain purpose or to a certain program. So let's go back to that great organization that's helping all those poor out-of-work anteaters in our community. Betty Smith could sit down with you and she could say, my mother was an out-of-work anteater, and I have a real passion for that because she had trouble finding food, and I know you have a food pantry. I'm going to give you $5,000 to support that food pantry. That's a restricted gift. Jeremy, if you could take us to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the development cycle. So first things first with the development cycle, your donor, whether they're a prospect, whether they're new, or whether they have supported you every year since you've been in existence, they are always going to be part of that development cycle. So the first part of a development cycle, again, it's identification. So this is figuring out who the donor is. Do they have interest? Do they have capacity? And also thinking about access. Can you get in front of them? I can't tell you how many times I hear, who should be supporting your organization? Michael Jordan. Well, yes, Michael Jordan has a lot of money and he should absolutely be supporting the organization that I work for. But I don't know Michael Jordan, and I don't know anybody who knows Michael Jordan. And outside of hanging out at Selwyn Pub, I don't think I'm going to get in front of him. So be really realistic when you're thinking about identifying potential donors. Again, think about the interest. Do they have an interest in your mission, in what you're trying to do, and do they have the capacity? And this is a great use of your network. Who do you know? Who do you know that knows somebody? Do you have a board member that works at a company? So identification, research, investigation, interest, and capacity. When you've identified that potential donor, you know that they're interested in your organization. They know that they have a passion for your mission. You know that they have the potential to make a major gift. That's when cultivation starts. Again, cultivation is all about engagement. It's nothing to do with asking and everything to do with education. So a great example of cultivation is maybe you have a knitting workshop for out of work anteaters and you want this potential donor to come and see what you're doing. That's a great way to engage them in what you're doing. Ask them to volunteer, educate them about what you're doing. Let them see for themselves the impact that they could make. When you've kind of primed them for the pump, when you've got them excited about what you're doing, that's solicitation. That's when you sit down and you ask them to make a gift to support you financially. I'm going to stop at solicitation for a minute and say that when people find out what I do for a living, and they say, "Oh my God, you're in fundraising. How on earth do you ask people for money? That must be so hard." I always say that asking people for money is not hard. That's the easy part. It's all the work around asking them that is really hard. So let's say you sat down with that donor, they've written a check, they've added an extra zero because they're just so impressed with what you're doing. That's when stewardship begins. That's when you thank them. That's when you show the impact that their gift is making. And that is when you prove that you are worthy of continued support. By the way, this is my worst nightmare, having my dog bark all the way through a presentation. So my worst nightmare came true. What's the worst that could happen to me now? So again, that development cycle, your donor's never not in it. So this donor that just wrote that huge check, you're stewarding them, you're going to identify them again as a renewing donor. You're going to think of a reason to call them and say, "Hey, I want to share an update with the work that we're doing." Then you're going to move them into solicitation. So again, whether the donor is a prospect, whether it's a new donor, or whether they have been a supporter since the very beginning, they are never not in that development cycle. And if you look at the right side of the slide, it might be your left. I've included a less theoretical and more sort of concrete example of the development cycle, and it's geared towards online fundraising because that's where most of us are these days. So I've included that, and I will just end my slide on the development cycle and share my favorite quote about the development cycle and say, you should always look for excuses and never look for efficiencies. So always be thinking, what's a good excuse for me to give my donor a call? What's a reason for me to let them know how much I appreciate them and share the work that I'm doing? Always be thinking of reasons to contact your donors that have nothing to do with asking. And I'm going to turn it over now to my very talented colleague, Sarah, who I don't think she owns a dog, so you're in for a treat.
You're wrong, Nick. I actually do have a dog, but for the most part, she doesn't believe in barking, which is helpful for moments like this. But thank you, Nick. And Kirby, he's got character. So Nick just did a great job of kicking us off with some fundraising buzzwords. And like you said, we as fundraisers, it's amazing how many buzzwords we use. And I'm sure there will be more that come up over the course of this presentation. So as we think about the development cycle that Nick just presented, and this concept of cultivating donors, asking them, making the solicitation, and then stewarding them, throughout really those three elements of the development cycle, you're going to be telling your story. And so one of the most important aspects of fundraising is really that ability to clearly and succinctly tell your story. You want to be able to give it as an elevator speech. Can you, in 20 to 30 seconds, explain the importance of your organization and the impact of what you're doing? And can you clearly articulate why donations are needed to make that impact possible? So you can tell your story throughout the fundraising cycle or the development cycle, whether it be during a solicitation or in the cultivation or stewardship phase. But when you start thinking about how to tell your story in the context of a solicitation or in an ask, that's another buzzword that fundraisers love to use, is to refer to the actual request for funds as the ask. So I have a couple of critical components of any ask that are on the slide here. So first, you want to demonstrate the community need. And that can look like a variety of things. But you want to make it clear that there is a need in the community that you and your organization are meeting. So for example, if your organization is working with the homeless populations or with housing, then you might start off by providing some information about the issue of homelessness in our community. In a grant where you are writing a lot of detail, you might give some statistics about homelessness in Charlotte Mecklenburg. If you are doing an email or a letter ask, then you might tell about that need through the context of the story of a single person who's experiencing that themselves. But you want to make sure that that when your story is told in the context of an ask, it's clear that there is a need. And then you want to show how your organization is meeting this need. You want to make it clear that there is an impact that can be achieved through supporting your organization. And then lastly, you want to invite the donor to address this need. You want to invite them to make an impact on the community by supporting your organization. It is so important for a donor to feel connected to the impact that they're making, because that's why they give. 9 times out of 10, a donor is giving because they want to make a difference. So you want them to feel like they're invited to make that difference. You're encouraging them to support your organization so that they can make an impact. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So now we'll start to look at what are some of the tricks of the trade for a written ask. Another buzzword for you is the word appeal, and that is a word that we use for emails that have an ask, email solicitations or letter solicitations. You'll hear fundraisers refer to those as appeals. So if you're looking at an email appeal or a letter appeal that you're mailing out, there are some tricks of the trade that I will review now. So the first is tell a story. I know the last slide was all about telling your story, and that remains true, that is an absolutely important trick of the trade when it comes to a written appeal. But really, anytime you can, you want to focus that story in on a specific person or a specific family. Generally speaking, people respond much better to the story of one person or the story of one family that feels very tangible to them and they can understand that perspective. When you present to them, hundreds of people or thousands of people are having this experience, it becomes more overwhelming and they feel like their money might not be able to make an impact. So if you can tell a story that really hones in on one person's experience, and that often is going to be the most effective way of presenting an ask. The next trick of the trade is to write with the donor's perspective in mind. And really what I mean by this is that you want to make it as easy as possible for a donor to read what you have written and to understand the point. So one thing that we just all have to embrace as fundraisers is that people are skimming what we write. 9 times out of 10, they are not reading every word, which is painful to say sometimes because we spend so much time writing every word. But we have to admit that people skim, especially, they get so many emails and so many letters in the mail that a lot of times they open it up, they skim it and they move along. So you want to make sure it's readable and skimmable. You don't want your font size to be tiny. You don't want most of your donors to have to grab their glasses to be able to read your letter. So make sure your font size isn't too small. Play with bolding and underlining for kind of your really important sentences that you want to emphasize. You have to think about the fact that some people will only read what you've bolded or underlined. So you want to make sure that you've bolded something about the impact, something about the need, and the ask itself. You also want to write simply. It's always a good reminder to take yourself back to your elementary school reading level when it comes to writing for mass audiences. So just, again, don't make your potential donors think too hard. So you want to make sure that your language doesn't get too complicated and your sentences don't get too wordy. You also want to steer clear of jargon. Many of us find ourselves working in fields where there's a lot of jargon that we might know and that people in our sector might know, but the general population is just less familiar with, and they have to think harder when you start using jargon. So, are there licensed clinical social workers, or are there just terms that you use that are just not known by everyone out there? So try to steer clear of those and really stick with language that is understandable across all backgrounds and all situations. Also, don't get too caught up in your program or your organization's details. And this is maybe the hardest thing to remember as a fundraiser, is that when you are speaking with a donor or making an ask, you want to take yourself out of kind of your own shoes where you know everything about the program and everything about the organization, because it's too much for someone who's out of the organization to process. So you want to keep it simple. An example that I can give for my organization, YWCA Central Carolinas, is that we have 2 different transitional housing programs. One is for unaccompanied women, and it's called Women in Transition, and the other is for families with minor children, and it's called Families Together. So I just gave you 2 different program names and used the term transitional housing. You might not know what transitional housing is. That's some housing jargon. And I can tell you all about what it is, but if I'm writing a letter or an email, that's probably too much detail. So what's really important is that YWCA is providing safe, affordable housing to women and families facing homelessness as they transition out of homelessness and into permanent housing. So this notion of safe, affordable housing is really the message that we want to send through a written appeal, because the logistics of the 2 different program names and the word transitional housing, that can just be too much and too complicated. So just keep it simple. And then the last trick of the trade that really is specific to email appeals is use a donate button. Anytime you can have just a button on your email, the donor can click on it. It takes you straight to the donation link on your website, which I would highly recommend having. And they can give really easily. So again, you just want to make it as easy as possible for people to give. If you are mailing out a letter, typically I'd recommend having a little envelope tucked inside of your letter that's already addressed to you so that they can just write a check and stick it in the mail. So it's all about making it as easy as possible to give. Next, make sure your donor clearly understands why their support is needed, and make sure you're asking them to do something. There's got to be a call to action in your email appeal, and your call to action is going to be to make a donation to create this impact. So you want to make sure that you are not getting too caught up in background or just information that really doesn't get to the point of why is the donor's support needed. And then you want to make the ask multiple times. I typically aim for 3 times in a written letter. So once at the very beginning, once halfway through to somewhere near the bottom, and then in a PS. A PS is always great. It grabs people's attention, and you can kind of summarize, like in 2 sentences, say, this is what your donation is doing, make a donation today. And so you want to have it multiple times so that, again, going back to those skimmers, they get the point. And also for those people that read it, you still want to make it clear that the call to action is to give. And then the last trick of the trade that I will mention is use the word you as many times as possible. And this is all about connecting the donor with the impact. You want the donor to feel like they are making a difference. And so if you are using you as many times as possible, then your appeal is really about the donor. It's talking about the donor's impact. It's not getting too bogged down in the organization. It's about the donor. All right, we'll go to the next slide for an example. Okay, so this last slide that I will cover before passing it to Erica is just a quick example of an email appeal. So I just found this online by Googling, so thank you to the St. Louis Area Food Bank. So that just goes to show that if you Google some examples of email appeals or appeal letters, you will absolutely find some that are good and some that are not so much. But here's an example where you can see some of the things that I was just mentioning. So first thing that grabs your attention on this example is the donate button. Bright red, easy to spot. You know as soon as you look at this that you're being asked to donate, and that all you have to do is click that button. Also below the donate button, it gives a really tangible example of what your donation can do. $25 provides 100 meals, and it's an approachable dollar amount. So it would be hard to have a dollar amount that's like $1,000 provides, however many thousands of meals, because that is not going to be an approachable dollar amount for a lot of your donors. And so if you start with a dollar amount like 25, then they feel like, oh my gosh, 100 meals, that's an incredible difference that I can make for only $25. Also, looking at this letter, you'll see that the need is really clearly stated. Now, earlier I mentioned that you probably want to focus in on one person or one family's story, and that is absolutely true, that your best bet is going to be to focus in on one person. However, sometimes it's just not possible. You might be in a situation where you're not able to tell the stories of the clients that your organization serves. Or you might just frankly be out of stories. You use them on, you had some great stories and you use them on recent communications pieces, and now you just don't have one to work with right now. So in that situation, we've all been there, and this is a great example of how you can still paint a picture of the need. I love this language that hunger plays out privately in the lives of our neighbors, plays out quietly in classrooms. So you can really start to envision the just effect that hunger has in our communities, and the need is really clear. And then there's also the very clear call to action. Please send your gift today to help alleviate the burden of hunger. We did not get too bogged down in organizational details. We're not hearing about exactly how the St. Louis Area Food Bank is alleviating the burden of hunger. We don't hear we serve 4,000 families each week, because it's not about the organization. It's about the impact, and it's about the impact that the donor can make. So this is a great example for some of those tricks of the trade in action. And with that, I will pass it to Erica.
Erica, I'm sorry to break in for a moment. You're muted.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Jerry. Well, let me start over. I was saying, thank you, Sarah. I was, Nick mentioned earlier that he loves to call himself a philanthropist. And after seeing Sarah's slides, it reminds me that a lot of times we're also storytellers as we're making these asks. And I get the privilege of tonight to talk to you guys specifically about the ask. And I have some heartbreaking news for you guys. There's no magic information in here. Asking does take a lot of work. And the first step in the ask is part of the donor cycle, which is all about identifying. So first, you really have to know who your audience is. And you have to, like Sarah mentioned, kind of clue in to who is passionate about your issue. So for example, if you're an organization that's working in food security, you might think about reaching out to companies that produce food. You might think about restaurants, or you might think about individuals who consider themselves foodies. You might think about those in the community who have community gardens. So those are just a few examples of what you might consider as you're thinking about who's passionate about your issue. And also think about what made you passionate about the issue, and then think about how would you message that to someone else like yourself. And then you kind of have to think about how you target each of your asks based on those kind of three pockets of charitable giving. The first one is businesses, or like we say, corporations. And corporations typically think about three things when they're thinking about their charitable dollars. The first one is really about how can they market their brand. So again, if we're talking about food insecurity, you might have a company like Kraft or Dole that might think about how can they get their brand out there and showcase that they're also helping the food insecurity issues. Another example is, or another thing that they might think about, and in the last 10 to 15 years has actually gotten really important to corporations, is employee benefit. So we found out that employees' happiness, which then leads to more productivity, had something to do with the charitable giving of the organization, and also volunteering during their time at that company. So a lot of companies now are looking at providing charitable dollars to those organizations or nonprofits who can also provide volunteer services to their employees. So it's something to think about. If you have an opportunity, let's say again, you have a community garden, what if you had some of the employees at the company come out and help you pick some of the items or do some other work around that community garden? And then finally, how do their constituents or customers benefit? So those are the three things that you really need to think about when you're targeting an ask to a business. There's a really great example that's been floating around lately about Avid Exchange partnering up with DigiBridge. So Avid Exchange is a Charlotte-based company who is a tech company that works with online companies to help them with their services. And so they recently partnered up and made a big announcement of how they were going to help break down the digital divide here in Charlotte by partnering up with DigiBridge, who takes used computers that are donated to them, repurposing them, and then giving them out to the schools. So it's a great way to go ahead and kind of, one, get their brand out there and showcase that they're helping a community. Two, that their employees can get involved with helping repurpose and then handing out and giving out the computers. So it's just a great story of how you can kind of think about how do you get a business or company involved. So the other pocket is foundations. And the real big thing to realize about foundations is there's a lot of different kinds. You know, you have big foundations, you have smaller family foundations, but the key for most of them is that they have a focus areas. And if they have a website, most of the time they will talk about those focus areas on their website. The other place that you can look, and I think that the library does a really great job with another session that they offer all about grants and how to write a grant, is on looking at 990s. And so you can go ahead and find on 990s typically where foundations are already giving. And that can kind of clue you in to the fact that they might be giving to a lot of children's organizations. So their focus area is really going to be children possibly. Or maybe they give all over the place. And so they're really just focused in maybe on a specific area. Maybe it's just Charlotte. Maybe it's in the entire North Carolina area. So you can kind of look and see on the 990s if they don't have a website. And then finally, recently, in the last several years, and this is one of those buzzwords, it's all about impact. And most times, foundations are really trying to look and hone in on the kind of impact that you're making. And when you're first starting off, or if you have a smaller organization, it may be really hard to know the numbers and how those dollars are making an impact. But to Sarah's point earlier, it's really important to start to showcase some of those numbers in the beginning. So therefore, you're setting that standard, and that years later, you're not going backwards and trying to figure out how to showcase that impact. So just keep that in mind, especially when you're reaching out to foundations. And then finally, individuals. And I want to just stop there for a second. One thing I will let you know is that in the United States, the charitable giving, the biggest pot of money that comes is from individuals. It's around 70%, and each year it keeps growing. So think about that, because individuals at the end of the day make up the most of the charitable giving in the United States. And a lot of times, especially when you're starting off raising money for an organization, we tend to go towards businesses and foundations because they give bigger gifts, it can be quicker return for your investment. But at the end of the day, individuals will be the ones, if you steward them the right way, that will stay around longer. And as we're finding out during a pandemic, a lot of times businesses and foundations are really going to end up pulling back some of their charitable dollars. And the individuals during this pandemic ended up continuing to raise more money. Next slide. So after you kind of figure out who your different audience are, I'm going to kind of break down the different ways you can go ahead and ask for money. And like Nick mentioned, there's a couple more buzzwords on here. So one of those things that you can do is prepare a grant. Typically, those are going to be for your foundations or your corporations. And the difference that I see between grants and proposals is I always kind of think of grants as the more formal way of asking. And typically those are the ones that you're applying to on an online system. They're a lot more detailed. They ask for a lot of those specific numbers. And with proposals, those are typically when you get asked to write a proposal by either a foundation, family foundations, typically corporations, or a major donor, you've gone to them and kind of given them your ask. I'm looking for you to help me support this cause for about maybe $10,000, for example. And they might come back to you and say, that sounds great, but I'd really like something in writing so that I can understand how that $10,000 is going to make a long-term impact. And that's where we kind of consider those proposals. Events. So it's funny because when we were putting these slides together and we were going over them together, we all kind of stopped at events. Events play a purpose. They definitely can help you acquire new supporters quickly. However, we just want to caution you that events take a lot of time and also can take a lot of money. So just be careful when you start getting into the event world that it's not necessarily the end to all means to fundraising and getting dollars. And again, what we're seeing in COVID is that when you are an organization that is relies on events too heavily, a lot of that money can go away quickly. And so again, there typically are individuals, corporations, or foundations that make up the giving to those events. So make sure you're always stewarding those folks that come. But during an event, if you have one, there's several different ways that you can get people involved and make revenue. One of them is sponsorships, and typically those are going to be your corporations. Another place is auctions, and I have found recently people love a good auction. They love to be able to, get a gift basket or get an experience, and so auctions are always a great way. But again, I would caution you, try to find the things that you can get donated during an auction so that you're not spending money on creating those experiences, and so that you really at the end of the day are making all the money back that people end up spending during that auction. And then finally, tickets or registration, depending on what kind of event you have. You might be having a walk, so you might have registrants or tickets if you're having a lunch or a breakfast or a gala. And then there's online giving. And so one of the ways that's become very, very popular, especially during, again, this pandemic, is peer-to-peer giving. And that peer-to-peer giving is one of those buckets that continues to grow every year. Peer-to-peer giving is what you see on Facebook when someone has a birthday pop up and says, for my birthday, I would like to donate to the Humane Society. So that's peer-to-peer giving. And I would suggest if you don't already have a Facebook page for your organization, that you get one, and that also you set up your ability to get donations through that Facebook page. It's a pretty simple process. And the great thing about Facebook is, one, it's completely free to do, so you don't have to pay for any other app or any other system. And second, and I think they're still doing this, but all of the fees, the credit card fees and everything are completely free through Facebook. So basically, Facebook gives you dollar for dollar what you get online. And it's a really easy way to get friends and family involved. It's also a really great way to go ahead and do, let's say you are an organization that is focused on breast cancer awareness. So during October, you might have a whole campaign on your Facebook page, and you could set it and you can say, I want to raise $2,000 during October, and you push it out there. That's a really great way to kind of have a small little campaign and get more of your peers or supporters involved that way. And then website donation page. Just like the email, your donation button has to be very prominent on your website. And I'm a big fan of, just like with Sarah with the emails, making sure that it's on several different places on your website. So very top, on the side, and at the very bottom. So at any time when they're scrolling or they're going to a different page, they should always be seeing a donate button. And a donate page is really easy. Again, PayPal is a great place that a lot of smaller organizations start with. You can get a PayPal page, and then you can just hyperlink it to your donate button. And then I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on direct mail and email because that's what Sarah did. But again, those are some great places to go ahead and make a formal ask to supporters that you may already have. Also, a great tool, which we'll talk about, but if you have board members, make them get on a board member writing letter ask. I mean, it's really simple. You give them the template and then you ask them to send it out to 10 people, let's say. And you make their letter so that they can edit it and make it their own. It's also another great way for peer-to-peer giving too, by the way. And the same for emails. So the many times that you can make an email or a letter more personal to whoever you're asking, the better. And then the direct ask, which means picking up the phone and dialing for an ask, or Zoom. I didn't put that on here, but that has also become, I've made many of Zoom asks this year. That's another great way of doing it. And those meetings that you have over lunch or coffee or in a donor's home. Next slide. So these are my kind of ask tips. My very first one is don't ever be afraid to ask. Asking can definitely be scary, and I think all of us on here will tell you that some of us still might get very nervous when we make an ask, especially if we're making a very large ask. However, remember at the end of the day that you chose the organization that you're asking for because you're really passionate about it and you really want to help take that organization to the next level. And really at the end of the day, you can't do that without more supporters, more ambassadors, and at the end of the day, more dollars. And so just remember that you are fulfilling and helping your mission grow. And also, you have your cheerleaders around you. Every one of these people that I'm about to mention, especially your board members and staff, should help you spread the message. Your board members have a financial responsibility for your organization, and you can remind them that. So that means that you'll need them to sometimes help you with the ask. And that doesn't always mean having them ask, but opening up doors or inviting their friends or family or their colleagues to get involved with your organization. They should feel comfortable because, again, they should be very passionate about your organization. Your other staff members. You know, when I used to work at my other organization, I would sometimes take some of my program staff who work directly with the children on my ask or on my donor meetings with me. It's really easy for them to speak directly about the kids that we're supporting, and donors love that. So don't be afraid to get them involved with helping you grow your mission either. And then family and friends. Don't be afraid to ask family and friends. Again, if you're passionate, they might be passionate about it too. And then your other supporters. So especially those very first ones that you start to get in the door, they have decided they're taking a chance on you. They're taking a chance on this new organization. So if they've taken a chance, like they're probably more than willing to go out there and ask other people to give you a chance too. So remember that. And like Sarah mentioned, always have your case for support, your elevator speech, or your script if you are making phone calls. I like to sometimes have a script laid out so I keep myself on track of what I'm trying to accomplish on that call. I might not follow it word by word, but at least I have some bullet points next to me. So have those things ready before you make an ask. I also am one that practices, especially if I'm going on a big one, I'll practice in front of the mirror. I'll practice with a colleague. I'll, maybe practice with a board member. So don't be afraid of practicing too. And then one of my favorite things is don't be afraid to hear no, because you are going to hear no, and that is okay. A lot of times, no is the beginning of a relationship. That's what we like to say in this industry. You might have someone that says, you know what, I'm just not interested right now, but could you come back to me? And you can say, absolutely. Would you mind if I stayed in contact with you and let you know about the organization, about the progress we're making? And typically they will say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And you might be able to go back for an ask later. Or if they say, you know what, this just isn't my passion, I'm not very interested in it, that's okay too. But make sure you always follow up with, do you know anyone that might be interested in it? And if they say, you know what, actually, I know my friend John, he might be interested. And then you can say, would you mind making an introduction? And then finally, listen, or one of the last things I have to say is listening is the best practice. So it's really, really easy when you go into some of these asks to do a lot of talking. And I have been there with a startup organization who a founder was so passionate about this cause and the mission. And she didn't know how to stop and just let the person she was speaking to talk back and ask questions. And sometimes as a fundraiser, we need to just listen. Stop and listen after we've asked a question or told them about the cause. Because sometimes you might get a really good nugget of information you can use later. A great example of that is I was on a call during the holiday campaign that we were doing, asking for a donor to renew their support. And as we were talking, she mentioned, yes, we love Make-A-Wish. Our daughter-in-law actually was a previous Make-A-Wish child back 20 plus years ago. That was nowhere in her record. I had never heard that. That was a great piece of information. And this is someone that has capacity to give a lot more. And so now I have that nugget tucked away, put into my system as a note so that I can bring that up and think about that as I'm making maybe my possible bigger ask later on. And then finally, like Nick mentioned, the ask isn't the hardest part. By far, the ask at the end of the day, when you get done with it, you're going to feel great. It's going to feel like a huge win, but there's a lot more work after the ask. And basically, keeping a donor is the hardest job after they make their first gift. Retention rates in our industry, if we were really comparing ourselves against a business or the for-profit industry, we would be out of business like that, because retention rates are typically an average of 45%, which is horrible. If those were our customers, again, we would be out of business. So thank you. Thank you goes a long way. Do it quickly after they give and do it often. And you'll make sure you'll keep those donors involved because, again, they'll be your best supporters, especially when you're going through a situation like this. And now I get to hand it over to Brittany.
All right. Thank you, Erica, for those helpful tips about making the ask. Those were actually really helpful for me. So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Brittany Jenkins, and I am the manager of leadership gifts at Charlotte Rescue Mission. And I am here today to share with you all my top 10 tips for new fundraisers. All right, so let's get started. So my first tip is to get a solicitation license. So in order to ask for money to support your organization, nonprofits must obtain a solicitation license from the North Carolina Secretary of State. And the cost of a license can range from $0 to $200. It just depends on the size of your organization, and I believe the amount of staff or time you dedicate to fundraising. So please, 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 if I could recommend one thing you do after this presentation is to go and look up a solicitation license from the North Carolina Secretary of State. And look at what are those steps that you need to take in order to get a solicitation license. My next tip is to create a development plan. So Nick kind of explained what a development plan was during his section of the presentation. And again, this plan basically outlines your strategies for fundraising. So how much money are you needing to raise in your fiscal year? And how are you going to do that? This plan is going to outline that for you about how you are going to achieve raising those dollars. So for example, do you want to create a monthly donor program where you're encouraging people to give to your organizations every single month? So what's your strategy to get that donor to sign up? How are you going to communicate with that donor and how often? And even how much do you want to raise from this group of people. Be creative, be innovative, try new things. And it's okay if certain strategies don't work. Just tuck that information away. It'll inform how you move forward and what adjustments you need to make. My third tip, which Erica talked a lot about, is just to get your board involved. Outside of your staff, your board are the individuals that are the most dedicated to your mission. These are your ambassadors to the community. Ask them to introduce you to people in their network, to make connections. Lean into their area of expertise to help your organization. And again, use them for donor thank yous, whether it's to call or just write a handwritten note thanking your donors. But really use your board. They are a great asset to your organization. My fourth tip is to not underestimate the value of your volunteers. If you're trying to figure out where do I start or how do I acquire new donors or get new donors, maybe start with your volunteers. They know your organization, they know your mission, and they already have shown a level of commitment to your organization by volunteering their time. So why not follow up and ask them to support your organization financially? Again, they may say no, but that is totally fine because we're hoping that they'll continue to volunteer their time with your organization. But that's a great place to start. My fifth tip, and to me, it's probably one of my most important tips, is really to stay true to your organization and avoid mission drift. And so a mission drift, kind of in the nonprofit context, is essentially changing your mission or your purpose or your program for the purpose of chasing the dollar. So if you, let's say there is a funding opportunity that is a little bit outside of the scope of what your organization is doing, then you decide to tweak what your organization is doing in order to apply for that funding or ask that donor to support your organization. Well, once you start there, sometimes it's hard to stop. Then when the next funder or donor comes around, they're asking that are outside of your kind of area, and you're tweaking your mission. And if you keep tweaking it, eventually you'll get to a point where your organizational mission or what you're doing as an organization isn't what you originally were created to do. You keep chasing that dollar. Don't chase the dollar. There are donors and there are funders out there who will support your organization and mission. Just keep trying, keep reaching out, keep sharing your story. The right supporters will come to you. And my sixth tip is to treat foundations and corporations like your individual donors. So check in with your grant funders outside of when you're applying for dollars. You know, share updates, share stories of impact. They'd love to hear from you outside of the funding cycle as well. So treat them like your individual donors in that regard. All right, and my seventh tip is really just to be realistic with what promises you're making to your donors and to your foundation and corporate funders. A common line many new nonprofits or fundraisers like to use is, 100% of your donation will go to X, Y, and Z program or directly to the clients you serve. And we know that that is simply not true because you have overhead costs, whether it's utilities or admin expenses. There are other costs that you also need to run your program. So don't kind of overpromise that to your donors or to your foundation and corporate funders. But also when funders are asking for certain outcomes, don't say, for example, that you will serve 100 people when you know you can only serve 50. Provide them with realistic outcomes and explain how you arrived at these numbers. Be transparent, and if you do not achieve the outcomes you originally intended, then explain why. Donors and funders really do appreciate your transparency. I remember a time at our organization when we reached out to a funder because we were getting closer to the reporting deadline, and we had not expended all of the funds that we had asked for because we've had a couple of situations to occur. And so we reached out to the funder. We told them exactly what happened. We told them why we weren't able to use all the funds. For our organization, we even offered to, send back the remaining funds that we had. And the funder actually reached out to us and said, no one's ever done this before, and we truly appreciate your transparency. And thank you for that too. And we were able to work with the funder, make some adjustments, and we're able to keep the funding and move forward in the program. But it just being transparent with those funders and being honest with them really goes a long way. And it really shows kind of your organization's integrity as well. So my 8th tip is a handwritten thank you note goes a long way. So in this day and age, so much of what we do is online, and it's just nice to receive a personal piece of mail that's not a bill. And it also just means a lot to the donor that you took time out of your day, or that your board member took time out of their day to write and say thank you for the gift that you gave, or the gift that they gave to the organization. And it means a lot. It's a nice personal touch. And you can decide, what parameters you put around sending a handwritten note to that donor. So whether it's a first-time donor, maybe it's someone who's volunteered for you a long time and then gave a first gift. Maybe it's an individual that gave a meaningful gift to them. You can set those parameters, but they really do go a long way. All right, my 9th tip is to build your fundraiser network. So get to know other fundraisers in the city or in the community. Those who might have similar organizations to you, or those who might not have similar organizations to you. This is a group to ask questions, to bounce ideas off of, and just to get feedback. I have a small little group chat that I like to send questions to that come up in the workday. Like, how do you all acknowledge this gift? Or what's your policy for X, Y, and Z? And these are folks that I trust, that I'm able to get immediate feedback and kind of see what's going on in the field. And a way to kind of help build your fundraiser network leads me into my tip number 10, and that is to consider joining AFP. So in AFP, there are a lot of resources to use. Locally, we have discussion groups called affinity groups. Because we are all online in this virtual world, a lot of webinars, we have a mentoring program, and then we have, networking opportunities. And then nationally, you have access to things such as literature. So there's a quarterly magazine that AFP puts out that has a lot of practical tips for fundraisers. And it's just such a great resource. And nationally, we also have webinars and mentoring programs as well. And so there are truly a lot of resources at your disposal. Locally at AFP Charlotte, we do have leadership opportunities available. So if you go to afpcharlotte.org, there are you go to afpcharlotte.org, you can find our scholarship application there, and you will fill that out. And we provide full scholarships for potential members. And so that's a great place to start if your organization does not have a budget to support a membership with AFP. All right, those are my 10 tips, and we have one more slide. So again, we just want to say thank you to the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library for allowing us to come and speak to you all today. As you see on this slide, all of our contact information is there. And I know we're about to go into a Q&A session, but if you have any additional questions that come outside of this time we have together, please don't hesitate to reach out to us via phone or email. We would be happy to help. All right, so I'll turn that back over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Brittany. Again, thank you to our panel tonight. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm going to leave this slide up for just a few more moments as we bring the rest of the panel back on to answer questions. Again, if you do have questions, please feel free to post them in the comments. We would love to be able to answer them. And I'm going to go ahead and bring the panel back on. Again, we have Nick Stewart, Sarah Lanners-Avinger, Erica Ellis, and Brittany Jenkins. And we'll leave the contact information up there for just a moment longer. But thank you all again so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. So one question that I had would be, what would be your top tip for identifying an individual donors? If I'm just getting started, I'm trying to build my network. Yeah, it's fairly easy to go after to do research on grants. There's lots of resources out there to find information on foundations and funders that way. If you need more information on that, feel free to contact me. I'll put my contact information up at the library. But we have whole classes on that. But for an individual donor, how do I break into that world?
So I would recommend looking at the people that are already connected to your cause or to your organization. And those people, they're already invested in some way. Maybe it is volunteers who are helping you. If you have some people who attend events at your organization, but otherwise haven't really been involved, those people that have that connection are really a great starting point to try to kind of cultivate and bring into your donor pool. That's my recommendation.
Thank you.
And I would just add on to that, like, again, what we talked about the board, but anytime you bring someone new on, especially as you're starting to grow as an organization in the very beginning, always ask about 5 more people that you can introduce me to. Or do you know 5 more people that might be interested in this? One of the things I love is a good small cocktail party or backyard barbecue where you could just have your friends and family over, or this 5 extra people, and just want to tell them about the mission.
Thank you.
Nick, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. I guess on the more mercenary side of things, the Mecklenburg property lookup is an excellent tool. If you know that somebody paid $1 million for their house, odds are they have the capacity to make a large gift. So that's a wonderful tool that you can use.
And that was not something I would have ever thought of. So thank you.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
there's an acronym that you hear fundraisers use sometimes, which is LIA, and L is the link, like the link to your organization. How is someone connected to it? I is interest. Are they interested in your cause? Do they care about it? And A is ability, and that's, do they have the funds to be able to make a donation? And so each of those becomes important. And when you're in the fundraising world, you're doing research on all of those, and the property tax lookup is a great way to know about ability.
Mm-hmm.
And something else to kind of add on, I actually had a colleague share this with me, and I haven't tried it recently. I don't know how successful it might be, but even just try wearing your name tag. If you have a name tag, just wearing it out when you're running errands, because you never know who might stop you and ask, where are you from? Or what's that you're representing? So, try a few times during the week, just wearing your name tag out when you're going to the grocery store, to a restaurant. You never know what conversations might come up there.
And don't wear sweatpants when you
Thank you, Brittany. That's a wonderful tip. I can attest to that. If I wear a library branded item, I will frequently get asked about it. Another question would be, what would be your top tips for relationship building? Here at the library, whenever we teach any of our classes, we're again talking specifically about foundations and funders, but we tend to emphasize, or we try to emphasize the fact that you're not just going after one brand. You want to try to build a relationship and make that relationship sustainable and sustaining. What would be your top tips for building those relationships and maintaining them?
Yeah, I like to call myself recently a instead of a fundraiser, I'm starting to lean towards relationship builder, just because I really do. My job now is more focused on major gifts. And so at the end of the day, like, when you start to get to that level, they really are a lot more intimate relationships that you're building with them. Like, you can get to know a lot about a donor. And I think the biggest tip, I said it earlier, is making sure you listen to them. Making sure it's just not one street, that you're not doing all the talking, because a lot of times we get stuck in like, oh, we just want to like vomit out our mission constantly because we think they need to hear everything. But at the end of the day, a lot of the times when you make your biggest ask, it's after they have asked a question or they have showed an interest in a specific part of your mission. And so you kind of target it. And then I handwritten everything. Anytime I can do something and stick it either in an email or in a letter, I do it. For example, in this COVID world, wishes, we can't have people going on some of the wishes that we're having. So for example, we're getting videos of them and I'm sending them now to my donors, either right after the mission happened, or I'm prepping them about the wish and then they get the video. Last week we did a wand reveal for one of our young girls live on one of our major groups. So we did like a live, like knocked on the door, gave her her experience, and people got to watch it type of. Again, it's all about thinking of those creative ways that you can share your mission with them.
I would also say that asking for feedback goes a really long way. That if you are speaking with someone and they are not a donor and you ask them for feedback, or if you're speaking with someone and they are a donor and you ask them for feedback, it makes them feel connected to the organization and heard and valued. And it can go a long way. And how you respond to feedback when you maybe get some unsolicited feedback, which will happen. Somebody will call you and tell you that, an email that you sent was not well received or whatever it might be. And that if you can listen to them, thank them for their feedback, tell them, kind of explain, maybe this was my intent, but I understand now how it came across. That sort of conversation ultimately becomes donor cultivation or donor stewardship.
Right. Yeah. It's not just all about the ask. Like, you don't want every time you just talk to them to be you asking for money. You want to be able to share so much more with them.
And I said it during my part, but look for excuses, don't look for efficiencies. And I had a donor who I am friends with, and I called this person and asked them to extend their pledge, and they said, the only time we ever hear from you is when you want money. And she said, I'm not going to do it because I don't have a relationship with y'all. So the importance of keeping in touch with them and talking to them when you are not asking them is major.
Oh, thank you. We had a question from Christy. How do you make your regular 25 to 100 level donors feel valued enough that they continue giving?
Well, I believe every donor, regardless of dollar amount, deserves a thank you phone call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
One thing.
Go for it.
One thing. Oh, no problem. One thing we do at our organization. So we serve men and women dealing with drug and alcohol addiction. We actually have graduates of our program. We have like a kind of like a thankathon, and they'll thank any of our donors who are giving, I think it's less than $500, and they'll just call. We give them a script, but those are actually really meaningful. And to me, it connects those donors with our mission. And again, it shows that no gift is too small. Every gift is valuable and important. So that's we kind of engage with our donors at that level.
And I would say that it sometimes can feel very overwhelming when you're a office of one to do everything we're just talking about. Asking, putting the campaigns or the solicitation letters together, and then also thanking every single donor that comes in. But that's where you really got to figure out who are your other ambassadors. So a lot of times you might not have other staff or board members that like to do the ask. Well, they'll do the thank yous. So have the board members, give them a list, give your volunteers or your staff members a list of folks to call and thank. Because you don't need to be doing all of it yourself. And at the end of the day, they really like to hear from board members and other staff members more than you. Let's just be quite honest.
There's also ways that you can do kind of mass thank yous that still feel personal. If you just send an email, even if you're trying to like really make people feel thanked, but you don't have the time to call 100 donors, you can still, calls are great and you should prioritize them. But if you send an email to those 100 donors that are BCC'd, but it's from your personal, like your work Gmail, or, not from like a constant contact, it's still say, thank you so much for your support that made this happen. That's still beneficial. And that doesn't take that long to make happen. So, the personal touches are especially important, but you can also add on these kind of mass stewardship moments and these mass thank yous that are still effective.
Yeah, I think I learned this when I was at Arts and Science Council, which is a really big nonprofit with lots of donors. My goal was to prove to the donors in my portfolio that there was an individual there at ASC who knew their name and who knew how long they had been giving. And so, Sarah, to your point about a mass email, what I would do is I would do a mail merge, and it would say, thank you, Eddie, for being a donor for X number of years. And people respond and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you knew that I have been a donor for 20 years. That's amazing. Or your database doesn't go back far enough. I've actually been a donor for 25 years. So anything you can do to be personal and prove that you know the donor name goes a really long way.
Oh, thank you. Would you mind talking about the importance of this sort of individual fundraising as opposed to just focusing on grants? We find a lot of people, especially who are fairly new to the nonprofit journey, know grants are out there and that's what they're thinking about. And it comes as a little bit of a surprise to be told that grants are not the majority of nonprofit funding. So would you mind elaborating on that at all?
I feel like grants feel like they're wonderful because you can get some great bang for your buck out of a grant. You can get some really serious money out of a grant. But the thing about grants that's challenging is that they're less sustainable because they're often less relationship based, even though you might work as hard as you can to build up the most sustainable relationship with the funder. If their board gets together and changes their giving priorities, you can go from consistently getting $25,000 a year to getting nothing. And that can hurt. Whereas most of the time your individual donors, they're not going to change their personal giving priorities. Once they feel connected, they feel motivated to give on an ongoing basis. And maybe one year it's a harder year for them financially, so they might skip a year, but then they come back. Or maybe they just lower their gift a little bit, but then they come back. And so the relationship is just able to be more sustainable in a way that there's just risk with grant funding because they can very easily change their giving priorities, and you are no longer a match.
Thank you. What about if you're a new nonprofit and you're trying to develop your track record? So you have this great idea for how you want to change the world, but you haven't done it yet because you're new.
That's a good question.
I know.
So how do you act?
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
I think I had, this is a good, I've dealt with this. So I was with a gentleman who had this brilliant idea and hadn't even gotten started yet. And he is now, and I'm not even going to say the organization or anything, he's doing amazing things, but it was just like this seedling of idea and he didn't know where to start. So we were going into these meetings and we were getting, he wanted to start with the corporations or those big names in Charlotte, right? And it was a learning lesson for him to kind of think through, like, okay, but those are the type of people that they're going to want to see proof of the pudding, and they're going to want to see results. And we got a lot of folks, corporations, that would say, you know what, we're not going to be the seed money, but come back to us because this is a great idea. And so it really took, again, we had to grow the individuals. We had to talk to the people in the community that this affect. We had to talk to, and we just started chipping away at like his Facebook followers, or then having some of these similar events. And I think, that's when you start then to put that. So then, for example, if it's a garden, you could then start to make the garden, right? And you can get the seeds, and then you can plow the earth and all that kind of stuff. And then that's when you can go back to those bigger funders typically and start saying, okay, I got this started, and now I need to take it to the next level, and I need your help. I mean, yeah, it's hard. It's very hard, especially when it's just an idea.
I think also, to kind of reiterate what you're saying, Erica, that if you are a brand new organization or brand new nonprofit and your big idea that's totally brand new is really, really expensive, find a way to start really small first. Find a way to kind of be still like aligned with the mission of the big idea, but start smaller so that you're only needing to fundraise a couple $100 or a couple $1,000. And then you can kind of build up and you prove your kind of dedication and your impact through these smaller initiatives before you go for like a really big initiative.
And find, if you're doing something similar or something that could be tag teamed with another organization that's doing something, maybe you have a mentoring program, for example, and maybe you want to do something a little bit different. I mean, look at some of the organizations that are already out there working with children, and can you partner with them and kind of, to Sarah's point, try to prove your concept. Yeah.
Thank you. What advice would you have for someone who is working toward their 501c3? They've registered with the state of North Carolina, they have their CSL, but they have not yet got that final 501c3.
Be transparent when you're talking to folks. Again, I've seen that, so just be transparent. Some funders will be okay with that, because you would just have to be transparent and say that there's no tax credit at this time. You're really helping us seed it, and that we're working on that. And you can, if some of them ask for that paperwork, you can show them. Again, it's all about transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. On the CSL, I feel like there's a lot of confusion for people that have like a donate now button on their website. How would you talk about people who get donate, or what advice would you have for people who get donations from out of state, since the CSL is specific to North Carolina, or this specific one is?
If you don't solicit the gift, then you're okay. It's only if you go directly out of state. So don't send a letter. Don't go to big corporations outside of the state unless you get a solicitation for that state. So if you are going to do that, you got to get your solicitation license for South Carolina or anywhere else that you might make an ask.
Yeah. And I would recommend getting a solicitation, because we're in Charlotte, consider getting a solicitation license in South Carolina as well, just because we're so close to that border.
Yeah, we have to pull out, when we're sending a appeal, we have to pull out of state people. So when you pull your list of donors and we want to send a letter to them, we have to pull them out of the mailing list.
And also, as you continue to grow, keep your eye out. And if you're noticing a trend of you're getting a lot of gifts from a certain area, then it might be worth exploring down the line, getting a solicitation license in that state.
And I mean, there is talk about maybe that will change someday because of the whole peer-to-peer, and states are realizing that. But as of right now, that's okay. And I don't know if we mentioned, but I mean, you do run the risk of getting a fine. And I worked at an organization when I worked in DC got fined by North Carolina when our solicitation license had expired. Do it in time. We did. That fine was larger than any donations that we got from North Carolina. So it's not worth it.
No, thank you for sharing. Thank you for that advice. One last question, unless anyone else wants to comment in the chat. What advice would you give for someone who has a donor that wants to give for one purpose, but that purpose is funded and there's something else within the nonprofit that needs funding? How would you pivot that conversation while still respecting the donor? They haven't made the donation yet. It's not a restricted donation yet. But how would you have that conversation with that donor?
So I'd say it's really important not to accept more money than you need to spend on a project, restricted money. So if you are getting $100,000 in donations specific to a project that only costs $75,000, you have a problem that you need to solve. And you can solve it, it's doable, but you need to make sure that you're only accepting restricted donations that cover the cost of what that restriction is. So if a donor comes to you and says, I'd really like to give, $25,000 to this initiative that's already funded, you want to hear them out, but then you also want to be honest with them and say, you know what, at this time, we have actually fully funded this program and it is a phenomenal program and we're so glad that you are inspired by it. Let me tell you about this other program that we have that's still in need of some funds and that is similar in this way and that might be of interest to you. So you just want to kind of redirect their intentions as best as you can. But it's all about, you want to be transparent. You do not want to accept too much money for a restricted project. So I'd just say be upfront.
Yeah.
And there is one question in the chat. How often do foundation boards change their giving priorities? I feel like whenever they so please. There's a bank in town that I'm working with that just changed their giving priorities, and my organization had gotten funding for years based on this giving priority that they now no longer have. Now, fortunately, we have another program that seems to be fitting in with one of their new priorities. So we're going to them and saying, hey, would this other program fit with your priority? But really, it's up in this case, it's a corporate foundation, but it's up to the foundation board, or if it's a family foundation, to the family to determine how they want to use their money, and they can change their mind whenever they want.
And usually if there's like a big task force at some point in time too, there is a major shift. And that's really true. If there's a big a task force at any time, and we could have another task force next year and there can be a shift. You'll also notice kind of corporations following whatever the task force is at that time.
Yeah, and Charlotte loves our task forces and our committees. But yeah, you're right. After the
upward mobility.
Yes,
Yeah.
Leading on opportunity. Yep.
Yes, that's the one. I feel like you started hearing corporations and foundations were all of a sudden running around saying, "Oh, well, we're doing that." So,
Thank you. And we did have one last question just come in. Do a lot of foundations have a president's discretion fund? I will say, on the library's end for that, one of the things that we emphasize in, go right ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things we emphasize in our classes is that every foundation is different, so that will vary.
I would say that, I was going to say, like, the foundation a lot of times, especially when you're talking about like a family foundation or a community foundation, it's still people that make up the foundation. And so when we do research here, we look at the board, like, again, I look at the 990, I look at who's on that board, and then I try to connect the dots to a board member, a volunteer, like, yep, I know so-and-so, let's make a personal touch point to them. So again, I think to your point, like the presidents, sure, probably a lot of times on family foundations, they all have a discretionary amount that they get. So outside of their focus. Good question.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to bring up the contact slide once more. But again, a huge thank you to Nick Stewart, Sarah Lanners Avinger, Erica Ellis, and Brittany Jenkins from the Association of Fundraising Professionals Charlotte chapter. I cannot express how grateful we are, and this was a wonderful program. I learned quite a lot myself, and very excited to be able to share this with our customers. I am going to put my contact information up here. Hopefully it doesn't block. Good. Well, I apologize for blocking you.
That's okay.
See if I can rearrange
Put your squares so
that.
people can see Brittany.
There we go. This is my contact information here. You're welcome to email me if you have questions on our future programs or on this. Also, I am happy to, as I understand, send out the PowerPoint. That's possible, right? From what I understand?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm happy to send that PowerPoint out. So if you would like to get a copy of today's PowerPoint, feel free to email me there. Next week on Wednesday, tonight was a special night, but next week on Wednesday, we will have Being Candid About Proposals and Budgets with Alexis and Dave from the organization Candid. That is again next Wednesday at 6 p.m. And to wrap up tonight, again, a huge thank you to our panelists. Give yourselves a round of applause.
Well, we thank you for having us. This is great.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank
And have a
you.
wonderful evening.